So I guess, as I said, we're still sort of absorbing, what's in the act, what's in the reforms that have been announced. But I think, from your perspective, what were your 5 kind of key takeaways from what was announced last week?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. So I think we're really pleased that the reform package was announced last week, and it does look to address most of the key recommendations that we were waiting to see a response to from the Royal Commission and the Aged Care Task Force. I think from what I've seen so far, the reform package looks to balance the needs of older people, government and providers. We're seeing better separation of government and individual cost responsibilities, with government to fund care through ANAC, and individuals to fund more of the things that they're used to paying for throughout their lives. And we're also seeing maintenance of a strong safety net, which is really important in our community, including lifetime caps on some charges for those with means and government support for people of low or no means. We're very pleased to see the higher room price threshold, the reintroduction of RAD retentions and indexation to room prices and DAPs. All of these help to address the cost of capital for providers. We think the expected changes will improve returns for providers and enable providers like Regis to invest in further greenfield aged care developments. And we have 3 pipeline developments in Toowong in Queensland and Belrose and Carlingford in New South Wales. And then finally, expansion of the home care program we see as being really positive, again, for the community and for providers, with more services to people and across more funding classifications. I think that's all very welcome, although we would still have some questions about workforce availability.
Yeah, I think workforce, I did an opinion piece last week, saying, it is the big unanswered question is where are the people going to come from?
Absolutely.
Was there anything that surprised you in the reforms that you weren't maybe expecting?
I don't think there are any big surprises in the reforms. I think most of it was as we had expected.
Yeah. And in terms of anything that was missing, is it that workforce question for you?
So I think the workforce question is a really important one, and we need a proper planning process around workforce, because we've got lots of industries competing for the same workforce and lots of countries competing for the same workforce as well. So there's definitely another piece of work required there. And then I think we're waiting on the rules and also the pricing authority for clarity around some elements of the reform as well.
Yeah. And then, uh, in terms of Regis's strategy moving forward, have you thought, you mentioned home care earlier, have you thought about how it might change that strategy, if at all?
So Regis has a home care program now, and we'd certainly been looking at expanding the home care program and looking at things like assisted living, but waiting for some clarity through the reform. So they're areas we'll definitely have a better look at now.
Yeah. And then, you mentioned your 3 development sites. In Regis's full year results, you sort of had flagged that that was dependent on what was going to come out of the task force. Do you feel confident now about building new aged care beds? Do you think the banks will fund you?
Yeah, I think this gives us a lot of confidence, actually. So one of the biggest inhibitors for Regis and for many providers has been a lack of certainty. Seeing the bill and knowing that both sides have provided support to the funding elements of the bill gives us enough confidence now to progress those 3 developments. And yes, we are confident that the banks will fund us.
Yeah, it's the big question, isn't it? And I guess, finally, do you feel optimistic for the future now that we finally have this resolution on and, at least we can sort of start making decisions?
I think the announcement last week is a pivotal change for older people and the aged care sector. It certainly gives us more confidence and optimism about the future. But again, I just note the substantial work that's going to be required by government, the regulator, and providers to see this reform successfully implemented.
Yeah. Do you think, I mean, it's still going to, and I'll go off topic on this, it's still going to take some time for the reforms to filter through because of the grandfathering arrangements that have been agreed on by the government and the opposition. Do you foresee there's going to be some more consolidation in the market in the next sort of 3 to 5 years because of the time it's going to take for, any funding to filter down?
Yeah, I think there are two issues there that are top of mind for me. So one, I think we will see more consolidation because you're right, people have been holding on for a long time, and I suspect that some of those providers will choose to opt out, and the sector needs consolidation. So I think as long as that's done in an orderly and a supported way, that will be okay. The second thing for me is I remain concerned about the time period that we have to prepare ourselves as a sector for the baby boomer generation coming through and the increased numbers of people that we expect will require residential and home care services. So there's a building program that needs to be undertaken. And again, the supply of workforce is a critical area that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Grant Corduroy's forecast that he's put forward is that we will actually be about 21,000 beds short compared to what we have now by 2030 because of even based on the number of new beds being built, we're also closing old beds that can't be refurbished. And I think as you rightly pointed out, workforce continues to be the main challenge for operators, particularly around nursing. Does Regis have any sort of strategies or plans in place to ensure that you've got the workforce to match your beds and your home care expansion?
So, as long as I've worked in the health and aged care sector, we've known about the global shortage of registered nurses, and I can't say that that's been addressed at this point. I think we also need to have a look at innovative workforce models, and that will only become more pressing as time goes on. And we do have the expansions, we hope, in terms of residential aged care bed availability and more home care packages. So we'll need to think very carefully as a sector and a community about those workforce models.
Mm-hmm. And I guess finally, do you feel optimistic for the future?
I do. I'm much more optimistic this week than I was last week. Really pleased to see the bipartisan support, which I think is critical for this type of reform. We must have bipartisan support for the key elements of the reform. And we obviously are aware that there's a process to go through now before we actually get to a New Aged Care Act. But we've certainly seen both sides of government work constructively and cooperatively on this piece of the reform. So we're hopeful that those conversations will continue in good faith to get us through to the New Aged Care Act.